Eye on Tech. Smile ID has released a new report on identity verification across the African continent. The report is titled The State of KYC in Africa, H1 2023, and it looks at, of course, the adoption of identification verification across the African continent. Joining us now from London, Mark Straub. He is the CEO of Africa-focused identity solutions company Smile ID, and we're hoping that we should. Mark, can you hear us? I hope Mark is Mark with us? All right. While we
yes, I'm here.
There
Great
you
to be
are.
with you today.
Good morning, Mark. Thanks for joining us. So you crossed the milestone of. By the way, I like that Ghanaian flag in the background, and the South African flag too. You crossed a milestone of 75 million identification checks over 6 years, 5% of the African continent. How much effort went into getting there?
Lots of sleepless nights, lots of coffees, and lots of code. But most importantly, lots of collaboration with our partners across industry, both commercial and public sector.
We've got some key takeaways from the report. Yeah, so there it is, 75 million checks between 2017 to 2023, 5% of the content, as you said, lots of coffee, lots of sleepless nights. It's a lot of effort. Now, Mark, 3 takeaways from the results on the advancements from biometric verification, the critical importance of ID databases, and the growth of digital identity adoption across Africa. Can you talk us through each of those 3, I guess, starting with the biometric verification and how it reduces fraud?
Yeah. So the primary point we wanted to make with this was that we see different kinds of verifications. Some verifications are purely based on a name or an ID number, and some of the verifications that we do include images, selfies. And we use face recognition to confirm that someone who's applying for an account or a loan is, in fact, the holder of that credential. But not all of our traffic, not all of the requests that are made to us include an image. We've found that when companies use biometrics instead of just text, we're able to reduce fraud by at least 50%. And this is why we're such advocates for using biometrics when onboarding users, especially when doing so remotely.
What about, it says, this old report also says ID databases remain critical infrastructure for real-time databases. Is that pretty straightforward?
Yeah, basically, ID databases are these national ID systems, national IDs, driver's license, voter ID systems, passport systems, and increasingly they've been built across Africa. These are a new piece of critical infrastructure for the digital economy. Unfortunately, not all of them are always up all the time. And so when these databases go down or when they're unavailable and you make a request, that can mean that someone's not getting a loan or not getting a bank account or not perhaps getting access to their money when they need it. And it would be like if you had a bridge that closed 5% of the day or closed every 30 minutes at random intervals. And so these databases are critical infrastructure. They're a very good return on investment. And mostly when they run well, it actually allows the digital economy to flourish. So we're basically putting a spotlight on that and reminding policymakers of how important these investments in national ID public infrastructure actually are.
Can you talk about the challenges, though, Mark? You talked about the sleepless nights, the coffee, just getting to that 75 million checks. What about the challenges with scaling ID verification across Africa?
We like to say this phrase, and I borrowed it from another very successful Nigerian company, Flutterwave. And the phrase is, we don't believe Africa is one country, but we want to make it feel like it is, especially from the standpoint of developers. And so a lot of what we do is standardizing the methods of verification or the responses that you get back, regardless of what country you're making that request in. So whether it's Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, or Ghana, as you saw from the flag, we want to make these pieces of infrastructure work seamlessly and consistently, regardless of the country in question. But that requires a lot of work behind the scenes because each country has its own laws it has its own national ID infrastructure, it has its own ID types. So we have to try to standardize these things and put them into software for developers. We're very excited to mention that we also have recently launched global identity verification using documents. So we can now verify not only documents from across 52 different African countries, but also global passports, global national IDs, voter IDs, residence permits, etc., from over 225 countries. So whether there are Africans living and working in Africa or living and working in Europe, or Europeans or Americans working across the world, sometimes doing business in Africa, we can provide solutions to verify that whole span of users. And this is really important as African fintechs begin to become more global and do business across international borders.
That really is. That's really great stuff. Lots of cohesion there. Mark, we have here in Nigeria, we have a new minister designate for communications and the digital economy. He comes from the tech community. That's Dr. Bosun Tijani. You mentioned, what governments need to do. Is identity at the top of the food chain or the top of priorities? Well, what's your message to the government as this new minister as he takes this new portfolio?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting news. I think we have seen some really positive news in Nigeria in the last couple of months, and I want to just highlight that. I think the confirmation of Bosun Tijani is a really strong signal to the tech community that that government is listening and that government wants to be part of the solution. I think the liberalization of the exchange rate, while it's short-term painful, it is necessary medicine for the long term. And I think the announcement of the partnerships between the Nigerian and Egyptian central banks to create standards for financial technology is also a really positive piece of news. So it does seem like that at least the Nigerian government is listening, which is great. I think identity is at the top of many governments' priorities. We see that in Kenya with a lot of announcements happening there. We see the Ethiopian national ID system coming online. The Egyptian national ID system is now creating standards for digital verification. So it is at the top of the agenda. There is definitely still a lot of open questions to be worked out. And the rules for accessing these systems are still very murky. And we are advocates of transparency and consistency. So we want to see rules get published. We want to see clear enforcement of those rules. And we want to be part of a regulated ecosystem for identity verification and the protection of digital privacy.
Mark, final question for you. What is your outlook for the growth of identity verification across Africa for the rest of this year and beyond, as far as headwinds are concerned and what needs to be done?
Yeah, I think, the long-term picture, I think, is still very exciting. I talk about this quote often. There, on average, Americans and folks in let's say, the West often have as many as 3 or 4 different payment instruments in their pockets that they can use to buy things online, like Visa and MasterCards, etc. Whereas in Africa, that number right now is still less than 1 digital payment instrument per person. And if you believe that Africa will follow the path globally towards digitization and economic growth, then the number of payment instruments that will be issued in Africa will be massive, because you've got over 1.4 billion people. Many of them are entering the workforce. They are typically getting smartphones. They're part of a digitization wave and an urbanization wave. So I think we are going to see hundreds of millions, if not billions, of identity verification events as these consumers join the global economy and the digital economy. And that bodes very well for the long-term future of digital identity.
Mark Straub, co-founder, CEO of Smile ID. We just want you to have a Nigerian flag next time we talk to you in the background.
It's just at the other end of the room.
Oh, it's at the other end? Okay,
cool.
So we'll have you sit at that end of the room next time we talk to you. Mark, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you talking to Arise News. Thank you so much.